The All Black podcast is powered by our official cloud software partner, SAP, helping our teams in black become the best run teams in sport. To listen to this episode and all the All Black podcasts, subscribe on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere you get your podcasts. This is the All Blacks podcast.
Kia ora whānau, welcome to the All Black podcast powered by SAP. The 2024 All Black season is close to kicking off. There is always change after a World Cup, and this season is no different, with a new head coach, new assistant coaches, and no doubt some new players. As we build the All Black season, we chat to one of the new members of the coaching team. Welcome to the pod, Jason Holland.
Thanks very much. Thanks for having me.
Mate, first, congratulations on becoming All Black assistant coach. There's all these milestones along the way, and you've been in the game for ages, for a long time, but it must have been pretty cool. Did you do anything to celebrate, a cheeky little steak dinner with the family, or what did you do when you sort of officially got the news that you were going to be part of the coaching team in 2024?
Oh, yeah, look, it's pretty humbling when you get the call from Ray to jump on board. You work away pretty hard, especially over the last 10 or so years of my coaching career. I reckon you work away pretty hard trying to be better. But to get to the space where you're part of the coaching team of the All Blacks is pretty humbling. And we had a couple of quiet not whiskies, a couple of quiet champagnes here with the family, and
Awesome.
It doesn't last very long because you start thinking around nailing your job after the first couple. So we're into it.
Totally, and it's an interesting thing, isn't it, being a coach, because it's a great gig, and I'm sure you love it, and that's why you do it, and you've had a really successful career already. But there's a lot of things wrapped around our current players, and we need to do that because it's a high pressure role to be an international rugby player or even a super rugby player. But perhaps some of that support structure isn't as prevalent around our coaches. Sometimes it's pretty brutal. You can lose jobs. You have to go to different parts of the world to get gigs. There's not as many gigs, as well, of course, being a coach rather than a player. So, probably still really important to celebrate the good stuff, because I'm sure there's been some challenges along the way as well.
Yeah, and I think all that, as far as the support getting wrapped around you, that's getting better and better.
Yeah.
There's more and more resource around that. The big part around that, I think, is all those stressful things you just talked around, is around families. I reckon a lot of the time, you're packing up your crew and moving on to a different city, and they're going to different schools, and
Yeah.
so that's a massive part of the coaching gig, I reckon, and with the players, having that family, or that especially that wife that understands that's the game,
Yeah.
and is going to get on with her life, but is happy to carry on and maybe move a little bit, is massive in this game, in the sporting world. So that's pretty important.
I suspect you've got a special lady in your life by the sounds of it, which is awesome. Mate, before we get into it, a few warm-ups before we get into the sort of the rugby journey of Jason Holland. Did you have any favourite players growing up? Was any posters on the wall and someone that you tried to, maybe not, model the game on?
Yeah, I remember having a Smoking Joe Stanley poster on my wall. He was always a machine. I used to love that the hip swing and the big pass out to someone on the wing like JK. But I suppose he was on my wall. I remember being at the '87 World Cup with the old man when JK scored his try against Italy. That's probably a memory that sort of sticks with me. And I suppose the only other guy I can think of that I loved, and it's probably stayed with me all the way till now, around how I think the game should be played, was Frano Botica. He wasn't too much older than me, but I just loved the way he played. He was obviously behind Foxy, but loved to have a crack. And he was always a bit of a favourite of mine, actually, until one day where Taranaki were playing North Harbour, and I think it was him and Walter Little and Bunsey, and they pretty much, it was a bit of a scuffle, and they pretty much beat me up park. So yeah, still got a lot of time for Frano, but I remember that moment as well.
She was it was a bit more brutal, the game back in the day, wasn't it? But he was sort of a player ahead of his time, wasn't it? Sort of guy you'd love to almost see play rugby these days, wouldn't it? When to see how his skills would translate. Maybe give him a little bit of time in the gym and see if he's still got that sort of X factor play, which was pretty cool. I remember him; it was awesome. What about influential people on your journey, whether it be playing, coaching, whatever it may be? Like any mentors or people who have really shaped where you are today?
It's been sort of, there's no one person. Obviously, there's lots of people along the way that have massive influence on you. Obviously, the oldies were big into their sport, and that sort of shaped everything for me. Tracking the old man to club rugby training when he was coaching and those sorts of things sort of set up the love for and the desire to play and coach footy. But guys that have given me opportunities along the way. I remember I came home when I finished playing overseas, and a guy called Declan Kidney gave me an
Right.
opportunity to go coaching in Munster. Decky was a cool man, and Tony McGann gave me an opportunity as well to coach over there, and I learned a lot off Dumper, who's now not in the game. But yeah, there's lots of people that you sort of learn off, and you get little bits off on the way, and whether you say I'll do it that way, I wouldn't do it that way, but yeah, there's in this game, there's so many people and so many resources that just to watch and see how they do things that you can grow from.
I love it. Look, if it wasn't coaching, if it wasn't rugby, which has taken up, a significant chunk of your life, like what would you be doing today? What would we be talking about?
Yeah, it's a good question because I went to varsity when I first left school and I wasn't the best scholar. I was in Palmy, and footy was pretty important to me on a Saturday, and the occasional trip to the Fits was also pretty important back then. And I sort of halfway got through my degree. I got an accountancy degree, which I halfway through, and yeah, hopefully I don't have to go back and finish it because I don't accountant. So yeah, I don't know. It's definitely in the sporting world now.
Yeah, totally. It doesn't sound like there's too many boys lining up to get you to do the tax return by the sounds of it. But you talked a little bit about some of the players that you were lucky enough to play against over the years a little bit earlier there, but like best players you've played with and against. We're going to chat a little bit about it later in the pod, but obviously heaps of footy played here in New Zealand, but also a heap overseas as well.
Yeah, my journey was obviously through Manawatu and then through Taranaki. I remember playing for the Naki. I think it was '98. We made the semi-finals down at Carisbrook against Otago. So that was a team stacked full of the Cronfields and the Wilsons and Tony Brown and John Leslie and all those sorts of boys, and getting a hiding in a semi down there in Carisbrook. But you look back on that occasion, there was a hell of a lot of All Blacks in that game for the Naki to play against in a semi-final, and yeah, there's a lot of lip that day actually. A lot of it, actually, no, there's lots of guys there, and then you go overseas and have some pretty cool years over in Munster, and playing in Heineken Cup finals where you got 80,000 people screaming and loving the game and all dressed up and singing, and those are pretty memorable occasions that stick out. Probably the occasions stick out probably more than the individuals especially from Europe.
Yeah, I love it. And look, I think I'm right in saying the nickname's Alfie. Where does that come from? Like, has that been with you for a long time, or is that a rugby thing?
No, it's been with me for a long time. Yeah, I suppose I can come clean. There's a couple of idiots at school I used to go to school with, and I don't know, for those of you that are old enough that remember Elf from Melmac. There was a TV show, very little creature with pretty strong ears and nose, and the boys reckon I look like him. So one of the boys came to school and called me Elf one day, Elf from Melmac, and it stuck wherever I've gone. So I suppose I can't fight that anymore. So I don't see it, but a lot of people do.
Mate, I know exactly the show you're talking about. Yeah, I don't see it, mate. I don't see it at all.
Good.
But there's look, let's go back a little bit to the playing days. Like, what did the start of your rugby journey look like? Was it really stereotypical stuff? Like, where and when did you get into the game?
Yeah, it was pretty stereotypical. But as I said, the old man's coached club footy, played footy. Mum was into a tennis, and they'd go off to the tennis, and we'd go off to footy on the old stories around the Saturday morning and the bare feet and the hail and those sort of things stick with me. But then really, yeah, playing for NPC stuff for Manawatu when I went to varsity and through into the Naki, and not really understanding what it took to be top level footy player through those years, I reckon, for me, especially in Manawatu. And it probably wasn't till I got overseas and was in an environment where I actually started lifting a bit of weights and understanding that I needed my body to be in good nick to be at that top level. I didn't really get that until I went overseas, I reckon. And so those are, it was a bit of a it was cool, and it was great to be playing NPC in those early years up until I was in mid-20s. But then getting overseas was where I knuckled down and probably played better footy than what I had earlier days because my body was in better nick, I think.
Was that because it was the real early years of professionalism, and that probably created an opportunity for a lot of people who did understand that early, did pick those things up early, did sort of become professional before the game was professional. Was that a real aspect of the time? Then you're almost just sort of doing your studies, training twice a week, and going for the odd run, but had enough natural ability, obviously, to make an NPC side at a time when when you talk about those games in 97, 98, 99, going down to Carisbrook, Leslie, Cronfell, Wilson, Tony Brown, like they're real heyday though for the NPC. So still fantastic rugby, but could probably get away with a few shortcuts at the time. Back in the day as a student, I assume.
Yeah, definitely. I think pace and strength, pace and power were big things that a lot of us hadn't worked hard to get.
Yeah.
I didn't have any pace because I didn't do any stretching and all those sorts of things. So the guys that were athletes, I reckon, really kicked on through those years, through
Yeah.
96, 97, 98. The guys that had already understood about in the gym and the power and their core and all those little things that guys understand when they're coming through school these days. The boys that picked up on that were the athletes always won the way because there were so many Kiwis, I reckon, that were really skillful because that's what we do. We play our touch footy and we do that. But
Yeah.
it was more the pace and the power and the body and the ability to beat people and be strong in contact. Those things through 96, 97, 8 were vital. And some guys had that and some sort of lacked behind in that space.
Mate, you played for the Manawatu too. Obviously, perhaps your studies took you down there, but you also played for the Naki. Was that special? Because that's where you grew up, I understand. Like, that's kind of home province, and at the time, Super Rugby hadn't been around for as long, so that was still no doubt, something you aspired to do, and probably something you saw as a young person growing up. People in your area, your club, etc., putting on the amber and black, and you got to do it as well.
Yeah, no, it was. It was. I always, wanted to play for the Naki when I was coming through school, but obviously went away for varsity. So to get the opportunity to come back for a couple of years was cool, and I think it was probably cool for mum and dad as well to see that happen. Actually, Mark Robbo was in that team. He was 13 and I was 10, and he probably got his name in the paper quite a few times, and probably claimed things that I'll probably put him through a couple of holes, I reckon. But no, they were cool years. Like Smiley Barrett was playing back there, the Slater boys, all those sort of hard out sort of Naki boys who were, the farmers and the boys who live and breathe Taranaki footy, and that was it was cool to be part of, and I still catch up with a lot of those guys when I'm back in New Plymouth.
Yeah, he still tries to live off that 5-try game, Robbo, doesn't he? But, I don't know how many metres he actually ran for. As like you say, Jace, I think a lot of other people putting him away. But, look, a huge part of your career was overseas, and you've alluded to it a little bit. But, like, what took you from New Zealand? And you were doing pretty well with your footy. Like, you're certainly, certainly playing a huge amount of NPC rugby. What took you to Munster? Was it change of scenery or just a new opportunity?
I suppose I was desperate to play super footy, but didn't really, as I've alluded to, didn't really getting your body right. So I was always just on the outskirts of super footy. And I had a mate who I played club rugby with up in Orua, up in Manawatu, who was over there coaching a Division 4 team in Middleton, just out of Cork in Southern Ireland, and said, "Do you want to come over?" My intention was to go over there, play 6 months footy, Div 4 club footy, and then meet my girlfriend or wife to be, who was in London, and we were going to do an OE. But went over there and got an opportunity then from that to get a Munster contract. So Declan Kidney came out and surprised me by saying, "Look, they want to sign me at Munster." So it was a funny old journey. How you go over there thinking, "Mate, I'm going to go and do some travel," and end up into professional footy. So great years. The club was awesome, Division 4 club, which I even stayed there for. I was in Ireland for 13 or 14 years, but eight or so as a player, I just stayed at that club because they looked after me so well. The people are awesome, and it's a cool little town. So that's something actually looking forward to the end of the year, catching up with all the people in Middleton who I haven't seen for 8 or 9 years is going to be awesome. But and then it set off the Munster stuff, and what an unbelievable place that is around to play footy. I know Alex Nankivell's there at the moment, and I
Yeah.
know exactly how much he'll be loving it at the moment.
It's funny though, isn't it? Because like it's not a double-edged sword, but it's a hugely social place. People who love life, live life. And we'll talk a little bit about this, but like just phenomenal supporters of their team, like of their local team. There's some fantastic images and pictures over the years of when Munster have made Heineken Cup finals, and they flick back to the hometown and see everyone in the street. Like it's out the gate, but also it sounds like a place where you learnt to be a professional there as well. It wasn't just the fantastic environment that town provides, but also that's where you perhaps learnt how to be a week in, week out footy player.
Yeah, yeah, and I think balance is the key over there.
Yeah.
Boys know how to work hard and know how to get things done, and they know how to enjoy themselves as well. So yeah, that was good for me because it wasn't full on, and that you don't have fun, and you're
Yeah.
waking up and not wanting to go to the gym, or not waking up and not wanting to go to work. The beauty about the Munster environment that we had in those days, and I'm sure they still have, is you work pretty hard and you have a good time as well. But yeah, as you say, it's a great place to play footy because people love the game. They can't wait for Saturdays. They look forward and plan their days, and they plan where they're going beforehand, and then come and have a really good time at footy, and don't necessarily give the other fans grief. They actually have a bit of party with them. So it's a cool place to be.
Mate, talk us about like some of the best memories there. I mean, you were there a long time, which was awesome, but like there was, really some of the legends of the Irish game you played with, like, guys that, had fantastic, not just careers for Munster, but for Ireland. And from what I've seen, when they're interviewed and stuff, like amazing characters as well. When you think about the Keith Woods and the Ronan O'Gara's, like, pretty special to play through that period.
Yeah, it was. There was some, you mentioned those two boys, obviously Paulie O'Connell and Mick Gore. There was another name who, when I first went in, was the captain, and he's the legend of both GA, the hurling, and later on rugby. But they just, they're passionate. Mate. They're passionate, and you sit in a huddle or a circle, before you get on the bus to go to a game, and the boys are just, there's 2/3 of the boys in tears. I don't know if we'd be able to do it these days because they're all so knackered by the time you come out of that meeting. But I remember those days where I'd just look around in the circle and be blown away by the passion they had, and what their people meant to them. So it's cool little lessons to take out of that as to how you keep performing, because I'm sure we played the game in that meeting room a few times. I think we did that
Yeah.
before the 2000 final. We lost 9-8 to Northampton. I remember that, in the Heineken Cup final. And mate, the night before was, mate, I went to bed absolutely exhausted from the emotion that was going around that night. So some good little lessons along the way. But mate, the Munster days were pretty special.
I want to ask you that, like, what did you learn as a player first? Like sometimes it's hard for Kiwis to understand, how significant those Heineken Cup finals, semi-finals, they are. Like, I would even say probably even more so during that period when you were playing. Like, it was when the competition is still a fantastic competition, of course, but it was almost at its peak, time through that period was. Those were cauldrons for you as a 10, 12. Like, does it help shape, who you are as a coach today? Does it help shape, in terms of the job you're about to head into, your understanding of Northern Hemisphere rugby? Like, did you have to adapt? Did you want to, I don't want to be a stereotypical Kiwi, but did you want to chuck it around it a bit more and actually, there was a job to do in terms of field position and letting the forwards get into the game and all those sort of things that you hear a bit about?
Yeah, definitely. Like I went over there as a 10 and ended up playing 12. O'Gara was 10. And the bit that I did have to get used to was that in those days they're playing a lot more footy now in the Champions Cup now, but we didn't play that much footy as a 12. There's a lot of physical stuff, you carry, tackle, and I'd always wanted to play the game with lots of skill. And what I saw as skill was catch pass and throwing wide passes and putting people in space out wide, whereas understanding the other skills of the game around gain line momentum, how you beat defenders, breakdown, all those sorts of little things which I hadn't really thought around. I was pretty let's just have a crack, and understanding the go forward and the damage a maul can do to you and all those sorts of things were thrown at me pretty quickly around that. And as backs, your job was to be nice and physical as well. So yeah, it shapes you, and there's still lots of lessons from those days around how you win.
Yeah.
And what are the little parts that you have to get right to win games, and definitely saw different sides of that when I was over there. And I think we lost nine, as I said, 9-8 in the final in 2000, and lost, I think, 15-12 to Leicester in a final, and a couple of years later. And just small little moments. I think Neil Back banged the ball out of our nine's hands into the scrum to finish the game. And Jamie Hamilton, our analyst for the All Blacks, actually was 9 for Leicester that day. So he was cheating. But
yeah, both were cheating, I'd say.
Yeah, but no, it was they were good. They were good days. But it's really good to get good balance of the different ways to win. And what's really important to win, and it's not just what I thought it was before I went overseas.
Mate, just to finish on the Munster stuff, so it's hard, I know, but try and paint a picture of, leading into you went to 2 Heineken Cup finals, as you alluded to. Unfortunately, you didn't get the W's, but it's different, half the town goes with you, maybe the whole town goes with you. Anyone who couldn't get a ticket or couldn't go with you is lining the streets, back at home watching the screen. It's flick to back. I can imagine, sort of as soon as you step out the door in some of those semi-final weeks and final weeks, everyone's asking you about it, talking to you about it, like it's sort of a big deal in a small town, isn't it? Can you sort of paint a picture around that? Because there are 80,000 people at Twickenham, or there is 90,000 people at Cardiff for these fixtures, which are effectively a domestic cross-border final. Pretty cool.
Yeah, look, the build-up. So once you get into the knockout stages, where Super Footy's at right as we speak, the hype around the place is unbelievable. The demand for tickets and stuff, and people coming to you for tickets and then not being able to get them, and some business has bought 10 tickets and are selling them for $5,000 each, and people are picking them up. It's unbelievable. But it was all about, as you say, around the streets and that you couldn't go too far in those big times. It's because people just loved the game and loved being part of it. The big part that we gradually got right over there, I think, was just embracing that and loving that, rather than seeing that as a bit of a burden, which I think maybe we did early on around just wanting to do it so much for the people and sort of losing our process around how we were going to actually win. So it's cool. It's really rewarding. Munster fans back in my day, when we lost, they were just as supportive as when you won, and that was awesome. And you'd go to the airport on the way home, and there was all these charter flights that had come with you, and you'd walk into the airport and you've lost, and they're singing and they're dancing and everyone's coming around. It's unbelievable. It's quite unbelievable. And yeah, it was part of the the footy. When you think around the highlights, there's highlights on the field, but a lot of them are off the field when you go over there.
Totally. Look, you did sort of start your coaching journey over there. Like, was that something that was just an opportunity put in front of you, or there was a time in your career, as you're getting towards the end of it, that is something that was attractive to you, or you started the process in terms of trying to contribute to the game in other ways?
Yeah, I suppose as a 10, 12, or like 12 over there and playing outside Rog, we always had quite a big part in how we wanted to play the game. We'd always be quite interested as to, around strategy. And like, as I said, Decky Kidney was coaching. We were 10, 12 in those days as I was coming near to finishing. And that's, as I said, I came home, was going to finish my degree, and then got the call to go back from Decky. And so I'd sort of, in the last few years, I thought, shit, I wouldn't mind coaching. But getting over there and being green as making some horrible mistakes around trying to teach and coach people. But knowing the game, I always sort of knew the game. But big learning for me over those first few years was how you teach, how you coach, how you get the best out of people. So, yeah, as I say, there'd be those first couple of years you look back at and go, oh shit, I wouldn't do that again. Or but as I said, Tony McGann was the coach that then um, put me under the pump as a coach, I think, and made me sort of work harder and get things done a little bit more efficiently. And he sort of turned me around a little bit as far as making me understand that, mate, you're not a player anymore. You need to work hard to help your players get what they want, and that sort of stood to me along, all the way along.
I like it. And is it no surprise to you that Ronagara Rogers is doing well as well off the field with his coaching? Did you have, was he another one who loved to break the game down, really understood it as well?
Yeah, he is, and he's mate, obviously knows the game really well, but he's a driven young fella. I'll call him a young fella because he's younger than me, but he's so driven in anything he does. Um, Got a champion wife as well who lets him do that, which is pretty important. Um, but it's not a surprise. He knows the game. He's driven to get what he wants, and he's not scared to probably tell people what he thinks and what he expects.
No, I've definitely picked that out. What about you? Getting back into New Zealand, and I think maybe connecting with Razor at Canterbury was sort of one of your first forays into coaching here in NZ. Like, how did that come about, and how did you two come together and gel and sort of work together in that few years ago now, and one of your first entries into coaching in New Zealand?
Yeah, I remember doing the interview for the Canterbury job when I was over in Ireland, doing a Zoom like this, and Razor had some clips ready for me of Canterbury playing a 2-4-2 attack system, and had this clip there for me, and basically wanted me to talk through everything I saw. And so I remember went through that interview and eventually got the job to come back. He still gives me a bit of grief about that interview. Reckons I was sitting there in my undies probably, but so that was the first touch. We'd come across each other a little bit in under-20s sort of coaching camps, but he just gave us an opportunity around that interview. And obviously I talked a little bit around the 2-4-2, which aligned with what he was thinking, and got the opportunity to come back into the Canterbury system, which in the end that year coaching that ITM team, or MPC back in those days, coaching team was Razor and myself and Scotty Hansen and Jace Ryan. So we had a couple of years together there.
Mate, what was anything stick out for you, Razor, at the start? Were you chalk and cheese? Were you different, but it complemented each other? Like, how did he sort of go about his business? Sort of leading that group of coaches, albeit quite a long time ago now.
Yeah, well, I suppose there's one thing that definitely jumped out at me. In the first, we had about 6 months to plan, and the big thing that I hadn't really encountered, and that just sort of organically happened in Ireland, was we'd spend six months before the ITM started, and I'd just get to a stage where Razor wanted a meeting with me and him and Chalky Carr, who the legend, who was the manager of the team at that time, and I couldn't get over how little rugby talk was in our meetings, how little rugby planning around how we're going to play. I couldn't understand. I grew to understand, but just the amount of environment, theming, how do we get the best out of people, although the planning that went in around that is something I hadn't really encountered as a coach until I came back. And back in those days, that was, every bit as important as how we're going to play the game to Ray. And that sort of was the first thing around how, you see what's important to Razor now and how he gets the best out of people. And was something that blew me away early. I just wanted to talk around what strike are we going to use here and who's going to run that line and who's going to do this. Whereas we talked a lot about that and setting the season up. So that was, when you look back at that, however many years, about 10 or 11 years ago, it's like, well, it makes sense now as to where Razor's got his teams to.
Mate, it's interesting, isn't it? Because sometimes I think when we talk about culture and theming and setting teams up, people, the sort of layman like myself who's not involved in environments like you are, you sort of think it comes down just to personalities, like people's character and their traits, and some people are really good at that and they're extroverted and all that sort of stuff. But one thing I'm continuing to hear from people like yourself and others is that it's very deliberate at times. Like it's something Razor prioritises, puts a lot of time into it, thinks about the makeup of the group, works with people like yourself to try and sort of see before we even, figure out whether it's a 2-4-2 or a 1-3-1, all these different things that you guys do, that the boys are going to hear the messages. And I think it was Jace as well who said last year, people don't care what you know until they know that you care, do they? Like, you sort of got to put the time in with the lads. It's a huge part of rugby now, isn't it?
Yeah, 100%. Then everybody needs to know we care about each other, but I also need to have that be pretty clear on what you want to achieve and how you're going to go about it too. So setting those sorts of things out early on enables you to care and then go and play your best footy. So yeah, there's been a lot of time going to that, obviously, over the last few months.
Look, assistant coach at the Canes and then into the head coach role, like, the question being, like, sort of what's your profile as a coach? Like, what's your style? We talked a little bit about Razor and we've talked a little bit about your experiences and probably, experiences that have really shaped you. But, like, how do you do it,
Yeah, look, I suppose the overriding thing is that I want to be excited about what I do, um, and what excites me around the game is being ahead of the game or being that step ahead of defences. So the attack side of the game is obviously something that excites me. The drive not to be predictable around how the team attacks is a big thing for me. Um, so that sort of shapes a lot of how I think. Got to keep challenging myself with the balance around, as we talked around earlier, around how we play the game and how you win. And that's always been a challenge for me around wanting to be really positive and really optimistic around how we play. And the winning balance with that is massive.
Yeah.
But I suppose I'm sort of one that have a pretty clear idea around systems and structures that you put in place that enable boys to show off their skills, the players to show off their skills and play and make decisions within that. So that's sort of how I will go about my business, and that puts some systems and structures in place that have scope for players to have a little bit of input or to say what they're feeling or see what they're seeing um, within those sort of systems and structures. And that's the way I've operated. And I think it's pretty important to have that sort of. I like the old 80-20 rule around 80% of it is what I see because I've done a heap of work around the opposition or how we want to play. But the 20% or the 15% of how the players might see things a little bit differently.
Yeah.
Look, we can do it this way rather than this way, but we'll get the same outcome sort of thing. That's really important to me. And that probably comes back to when we were talking around me and Rog playing for Munster. We made if there was things that we thought should be in the menu, then we'd have them in the menu because we know we've pulled them because we're on the park. And that's a little bit of how I see it. And all the teams I've been back in New Zealand, alignment's pretty good because the players see things similar to how I see them, but they might say, well, I don't want to do it this way. Let's do it this way. And if it's better than what I've got, then we'll do it that way. So yeah, I'm sort of, an optimistic coach. Need to keep getting balance is to curb that optimism if it means that it's not the best way to win.
Yeah.
And I've got a good idea of the big parts of how I think we can do that from an attacking point of view, but I think it's important to have the input of the players in some way.
I like it, and while you've had a pretty extensive coaching journey already, a lot of it's been here in New Zealand, and playing, against some teams from overseas, but a lot of Kiwi teams and certainly not Northern Hemisphere teams, certainly since you've been home lately. Do you think your experience up north is going to help you with this new challenge? This is one that, straight away you are playing Northern Hemisphere sides. The English are coming, and that's going to be your first job to do. And then, over the course of the next couple of seasons, there'll be other Northern Hemisphere sides as well. Do you think your time up there really will help as you, plan for those challenges ahead?
Yeah, I think so. And I think just having that little bit in my head around what the mindset is around the boys over there. And while it was a while ago, you can see some of the traits coming out around the physical side of the game and the old winning the one-on-one battles physically and those sorts of things. I definitely think they help. But to be honest, we watch a hell of a lot of footy these days. Back in those days, we didn't get a game from, I don't know, games over the other side of the world and have six views on. So now we watch a hell of a lot, and there's no excuse for not really understanding what the opposition's going to bring anymore. So, I think personally having time over there is definitely helpful. But we get to watch so much footy, we get a pretty good feel for it.
let's talk the here and now, and we're well and truly into our super season. We're into the playoffs, and down to our final 8 sides as you and me speak here today. What have you liked about super? Obviously, I'm sure great to see your old joint, the Canes, doing really well as well, and some of those younger guys that you brought into the side are growing into really important players for the Hurricanes as well. But what have you liked about the comp so far this year?
Oh, it's been unbelievable comp. I've really enjoyed it. I don't know whether it's because I'm not very deep in it or not, but I've loved the footy. There's so much in it at the moment. I think there's such contrasting styles. You look at the way the Blues have been so dominant with the way they've played. And the other teams are playing a little bit differently, but the competition's been good. The Aussie teams have knocked over some teams and are going to be competitive. So I've been really impressed, and there's some, as you say, some good talent around. There's guys that, you mentioned the Canes, but guys who are 3 or 4 years into the super footy, they know what it's all about. They're ready to win, and they're pushing each other. There's in every New Zealand franchise, those guys are there. So, I'm loving the competition, but also, the individuals that are coming through and showing that, mate, we're ready to play super footy and push to be playing international footy is really encouraging.
Look, as I said before, people like myself look at it from a layman perspective. I'm really enjoying the footy this year as well. There is a real contrast in styles. There's some new names that are coming through, which is fantastic, playing really well. But is there any trends going on with the rules, what some of the guys are doing to break down defences, maybe how they're defending, how we're approaching contact, whether it be the referees, like this stuff, just mainly, Jason, so I can sound, really informed and educated and smart when I go back to my club rugby environment, but is there anything that's been sort of happening this season that you've really noticed? Because I suppose, to the point you just made, mate, you don't have to think about it from a single team perspective, you can sit back and look at the way different players are getting the job done and sort of analyse, how the teams, probably one of the seasons where I really have noticed a contrast in styles, particularly from our New Zealand teams, but actually extends across the competition.
Yeah, some things in footy never change. The big things that are still dictating games are around the breakdown, and I've seen lots of really good pictures around teams getting go forward with the desire to narrow teams up by going through the middle. And I think the teams, you won't win super footy without nailing your carry and your clean. I think that's going to be the go for, and you think around teams that have been outstanding. That obviously the Blues are doing that really well, going through teams. The Canes breakdown's been good, and other teams, sporadically have been really good. So I'm sure that in all the environments heading into knockout footy, they'll be doing a hell of a lot of work on their carry clean to get go forward. The other things are what's coming out is teams that can eliminate the errors or penalty count is massive, and I don't think that's probably changed from when we were playing either. And that discipline will finish games for you. Just the ability to play under advantage, and then have a good crack for so many phases, and then have another crack from a penalty and kick down and have a maul. That's so instrumental in winning the game these days. So there's those little bits. Interesting for us and for me, looking at it from an attack point of view, is the difference in the defensive line speed from a lot of teams. Some teams happy not to bring line speed down edges of the games and give teams momentum down the edge, versus other teams who are getting wingers up and high and what's having the best outcome. And obviously from me thinking, okay, so if this team comes high, this is how we beat them if they don't. So there's a couple of things there which are quite variable within the teams around how they're defending, but the bits I'm enjoying and the bits I think that can win are what I've talked around, but also the desire, and this is my optimism probably coming through, and that I'm still seeing the teams pull out a couple of little special bits of skill or innovation, and scoring tries from it, which could be the difference in knockout footy. And I think the New Zealand teams are probably instrumental in some of that. So I reckon the team that wins the physical battle around carry clean, but then has the little bit of magic that they've trained for 1 or 2 moments in a game, I think that could be the balance to hold up a trophy.
Love it. had a camp in January. Was that your first sort of, albeit I know no team selected, etc., but was that your first contact with potentially some of the players, you're going to be in touch with? How did it go? What are you trying to set up? What are you trying to do there? It wasn't just, a Bronco every day and pumping a bit of tin. What were you trying to achieve with the players at that stage?
Yeah, it was a good real building block to some relationship stuff, which was really important. Some guys you sort of pass by over the last couple of years and say good day to and keep walking. A lot of those guys we got to get really strong relationships with, and the big part for me, we have one-on-ones on those with midfielders because that's my area. So having one-on-ones, talking a bit about themselves and what they're about and their family and then their game and what we're looking for in their game was part of those one-on-ones that we held over there. So yeah, all the midfielders I had a good chat and we've sort of stayed aligned through Super Footy every now and then. Though we might have a touch point around how they go, and so it's been built some good blocks to build on so when those guys are in camp and we're playing week in week out.
I love it. So, obviously the first job to do is pick a side, what's your role in selection? How does that all come together? How's that put together? And without giving too much away, we're going to get a squad announced, I think, on June 26th. But, it feels like any year there'd be some really tough choices, not just in the positions you're looking over, but, across the whole squad. Is that the case? And sort of tell us about the process a wee bit.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the process that Ray wants to put in place. It's been basically told that the midfield is my responsibility. Obviously, if Razor wants to, when it comes to the crunch, he'll really challenge selections if he's massively disagrees with it. But we've been challenged to monitor and watch closely the midfield throughout for the last 6 months. So the amount of detail that can go in when you're doing that is massive. There's a good group of midfielders in New Zealand, obviously. There's guys, there's the Geordies and the Ricos and the Albies who have been in there for a long time. But there's another 3 or 4 guys that we've been watching, or even 4 or 5 that are making it really challenging. And there's good competition in those spaces. So we're still looking pretty hard. And I think Razor talked around a couple of weeks ago, the last 20% or 25% of that squad, and not only in the midfield, is things could swing in knockout games as the next few weeks unfold. So it's been a good process, but it's so thorough because that's your area, and then I might bounce something off the midfielder with Leon or Scotty Hansen around the backs, but we can actually be really thorough on what we're looking at and what we need.
I like it. And I think I'm right in saying certainly in terms of positional groups, that's where we've retained as many as any. Like the guys you mentioned there have all been in the squad now for the last few years, which is fantastic. All playing really well in Super Rugby. Is it how many will we take in the midfield? 4, 5, or is it straight 4? You got four bodies to fill.
It's that's a little bit still. That's good combos at the moment. That is. There's a different number of squad so for the first 3 games we only got 32, but for the championship you can go to 36. So it was saying 4 or 5, so it'll be one of those. Yeah.
No, good. Look, as I said earlier, your first job to do, England, which is pretty cool. I understand they haven't been here for 10. They've been here since 2014, which is actually hard to believe. We've obviously played them abroad, whether it be playing at Twickenham or playing them at World Cups in 2019, but they haven't been here since 2014, which is amazing. So they're here for 2 tests, and you talked a little bit about it. You watch a lot of footy, you're able to access a lot of things these days. There's some pretty amazing software and footage and coverage that you guys are able to tap into. Have you started looking at them? Have you started doing the scouting for that series and starting to think maybe there's some themes around the players they'll bring, what they might bring at us? I certainly noticed from the World Cup that they started to use the ball a lot more at the end of the Six Nations than perhaps they did in that World Cup, where it was, it was pretty one-dimensional during those knockout phases for sure.
Yeah, I suppose, have I started watching England? I suppose the answer is about an hour after that moment where I got told I had the job was when we started watching England.
Yeah.
But yeah, look, they're quite different now, I reckon, as you alluded to. Watching the World Cup, Looking at it from an attack point of view, I could see some real space. I thought, oh, geez, there's some nice opportunities to have a crack there from our set piece, from a line out or a scrum, or thought, oh, that's nice. And then coming into the Six Nations, they're totally different. Way more organised for me, way more aligned as to what they're trying to do both sides of the ball. And as you say, I think they're trying to use the ball a little bit more. They will never go away from their DNA, obviously, around the dominance around the set piece and the physical, and trying to achieve that. But they're definitely a more organised team defensively. And I actually coached Felix Jones when I was at Munster.
He's their new defensive coach, isn't he?
He came in after the World Cup from South Africa, and Felix is he's a bit like Rog. They're pretty driven guys, and they know what they want. And Felix has obviously put a lot of good systems in place for England defensively, and they've got some good individuals there that will be pretty hard on our ball. Definitely been some real growth, I reckon. And I talk about balance quite often, and the Steve Borthwick, but this who loves the physical side of the game, but obviously understands the balance as well, because he's got some guys there who have got them playing a little bit more footy and being more of a threat with the ball in hand, not just by kicking. So I reckon what they were doing at the World Cup there, they're pretty unlucky not to be even closer. I reckon they're playing some great footy, and it looks like they're going to be pretty strong with their personnel as to who they bring over.
Mate, that's awesome. Thank you so much for giving us a decent chunk of your time. I know it's as we approach the kick-off of the international season, there's much to do, and you've got to go away and sort out a squad that's going to firstly take on England, and then very excitingly get over to the States, get stateside as well, and play Fiji, which is a pretty exciting initiative. So thank you so much for joining us, mate. Good luck in this new chapter of the rugby journey. It's pretty cool, and wishing you the best of luck, and the whole coaching team as well.
All right, thank you. Appreciate your time.
The All Blacks podcast is powered by our official cloud software partner, SAP, helping our teams in black be the best run in sports. Hosted by Rob Dunn in the Hargrave Street studio. Produced by Carl Thompson from Blue and Ginge, the podcast producers. Video editing by Mac Leesburg, graphics by Western Design, content advising from Andy Burt, and commercial manager for the podcast is Valeska Hove. Follow the All Blacks podcast on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, and anywhere you get your podcasts.